Spirituality is not a formula, it is not a test. It is a relationship. Spirituality is not about competency, it is about intimacy. Spirituality is not about perfection, it is about connection. The way of the spiritual life begins where we are now in the mess of our lives. A lot of people in spiritual life use the awareness of difference, and the spiritual glorification of difference, as a justification to indulge in that which is ultimately unreal. I don't think I have spiritual beliefs in the structured sense, but I believe in the absolute necessity of spirit and a healthy spiritual life. It grew inside me by itself, which is surely the very nature of spirit, and instinctively I protected and nourished it. I also absorbed spirituality by osmosis. Spiritual life can certainly follow the pattern one sees in the fake martial arts, with most teachers making nebulous and magical claims that never get tested, while their students derange themselves with weird ideas, empty rituals, and other affectations. God be thanked for books, they are the voices of the distant and the dead, and make us heirs of the spiritual life of past ages. The mystery of being human and, certainly, of being a Catholic lies in our embracing together the imperfect state known as the human condition. First and foremost, if we could ever be perfect or do things perfectly, we would eliminate mystery, an essential ingredient in the good life and the spiritual life. A sincere seeker knows what his goal is, the highest truth. He will not delay his journey. In spiritual life, we aspire for the highest truth, for God, nothing else. I don't think my work is about the spiritual life, but it certainly touches on it. In the natural life, we eat, we drink water, we give birth, we pay taxes. In the spiritual life, we can only reach it by faith. Business underlies everything in our national life, including our spiritual life. Witness the fact that in the Lord's Prayer, the first petition is for daily bread. No one can worship God or love his neighbor on an empty stomach. I believe that having a spiritual life is so important in everybody's life. I have finally decided to write my book on the spiritual life. I mean to put down as simply as possible the sort of ascetical or mystical teaching that I have been living and preaching so long. I call it Le Milieu Divin, but I am being careful to include nothing esoteric and the minimum of explicit philosophy. I think we have to be careful about what we label as a prerequisite for spirituality. I don't think you have to know a lot to have a spiritual life, but knowing gives life richness. Preaching is God's great institution for the planting and maturing of spiritual life. When properly executed, its benefits are untold. When wrongly executed, no evil can exceed its damaging results. I have always worked with energy. Everything is energy. Buddhism, Christ teachings. These are foundation stones for a spiritual life. Spiritual direction is an interpersonal relationship in which we learn how to grow, live, and love in the spiritual life. I've always been interested in what passes for what we call religion, what other cultures call their spiritual life. Christian, non-Christian, we're going to miss the mark. We're going to make mistakes. How you handle those mistakes and get more fundamentally sound spiritually in dealing with those mistakes I think have a direct impact, not only on your spiritual life, but those around you. One way to define spiritual life is getting so tired and fed up with yourself you go on to something better, which is following Jesus. I'm an actress and mom, and I probably don't have enough of an active spiritual life, and I don't know why people run around calling themselves by the names of religions when they don't actually practice them. In therapy I have learned the importance of keeping spiritual life and professional life balanced. I need to regain my balance. Questioning my spiritual life has always been germane to what I was writing. Always. It's because I'm not quite an atheist and it worries me. There's that little bit that holds on, well, I'm almost an atheist. Give me a couple of months. There the union of church and state tends strongly to paralyze some of the members of the body of Christ. Here there is no such influence to destroy spiritual life and power. The interesting part of my spiritual life is studying as much as you can. Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and shamanism and Judaism, Christianity, you try to learn what the precepts are, what the religion is, and ultimately, it's based in the same thought. It's based in the same outcome, you know. While in some countries there's a feeling that literature must stay away from religion, this is not so in India. In the Indian way, literature is just another means to find a more spiritual life, to find our way to God. A spiritual life is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How do you live? What's true? How do you respond? It's not about living by beliefs, it's about wanting to know. Like yoga, the spiritual life is actually very difficult. The history of our spiritual life is a continuing search for the unity between ourselves and the world. Religion, art, and science follow, one and all, this aim. True education is concerned not only with practical goals but also with values. Our aims assure us of our material life, our values make possible our spiritual life. I don't think atheism means one does not believe in a spiritual life. I think it means one does not follow the tenets of the established religions. My spiritual life is, sometimes I have access to it and sometimes I don't. When I do have access to it, it's usually a sense of my understanding what the best course of action or the best thing for me to do. By best, I mean when I have a real sense of doing the right thing and doing good for people and the connected universe of everybody. What you feel spiritually, I think a lot of that has to do with it. If you have no spiritual life, chances are everything is going to aggravate you. You're going to fly off the handle at everything, and that's what I did in the past. I've kind of got that under control now. I see my role as a scholar announcing that women's feelings of unworthiness and insecurity often may be traced to training in a male-oriented religion, and I'm trying to investigate a richer spiritual life for both sexes. In all the areas within which the spiritual life of humanity is at work, the historical epoch wherein fate has placed us is an epoch of stupendous happenings. The cinema has done more for my spiritual life than the church. My ideas of fame, success, and beauty all originate from the big screen. Whereas Christian religion is retreating everywhere and losing more and more influence, film has filled the vacuum and supports us with myths and action-controlling images. I wanted to show how a man of sensitive and noble character, born for religion, comes to throw off the orthodoxies of his day and moment, and to go out into the wilderness where all is experiment, and spiritual life begins again. Religious and spiritual leaders should be held accountable for environmental activism, not only because they have access to large communities and can influence votes, but because service is integral to religious and spiritual life. Discipline means to prevent everything in your life from being filled up. Discipline means that somewhere you're not occupied, and certainly not preoccupied. In the spiritual life, discipline means to create that space in which something can happen that you hadn't planned or counted on. Part of me wanted to disappear into a cave in India, and I did end up going on retreats there, but don't ask me why. I always felt very strongly that the point for me was to find a way to live a truly spiritual life in the modern-day world and be able to work with all the positive aspects of our cultural and technological advancements. In Barack Obama, Democrats have put forth a man of strong religious faith who is comfortable connecting his spiritual life to his public role as a policymaker. Art, like religion, arises from the spirit, but alas, the formalizing of spiritual life all too often ends in hypocrisy. The vigor and power and comfort of our spiritual life depends on our mortification of deeds of the flesh. That mystic clasp of love lies not on the threshold but at the end of spiritual life, and can be reached for the most part only after much spiritual exercising, many denials, self-denials, watchings, and, it may be, the cross of pain and disillusionment. On the whole, I now see my work as being an expression of my spiritual life and, because I look at it that way, I have a different center. I go through the stress and pressure, but I think I'm lucky because I come from a different source point. In my relationship with God, I've learned that if I follow up a formula for how I spend my time with Him, then I'm just accomplishing a checklist of things I feel obligated to do to please Him. This makes my spiritual life more about doing what I need to do to fulfill an obligation than something meaningful. I find that when I put my spiritual life first, the rest of my life is easy. When I put my career first, that's when I have problems. I've only paid lip service to a spiritual life. If it be true that our people represent a high percentage of mental vigor, the distinction is probably due, in some measure, to the extremely important part which Talmud studies have played in the spiritual life of the race. The joy which answers to prayer give, cannot be described, and the impetus which they afford to the spiritual life is exceedingly great. I know there's a principle of spirit. It works without space-time. I am subject to that principle, in spirit and in belief of body. Learn how spirit works, a few simple rules, living a perfect spiritual life is easy. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.